Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. May I start by correcting the record? Last night I suggested this was the largest government defeat since the 1920s. I would not wish to be accused of misleading the House, because I've since been informed that is in fact the largest ever defeat for a government in the history of our democracy. So, Mr. Speaker, shortly after the Prime Minister made her point of order last night, her spokesperson suggested the government had ruled out any form of customs union with the European Union as part of her reaching out exercise. Can the Prime Minister confirm that's the case?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that the exercise that I indicated last night is, as I said, about listening to the views of the House, about wanting to understand the views of parliamentarians, so that we can identify what could command the support of this House and deliver on the referendum. And what the government wants to do is, first of all, to ensure that we deliver on the result of the referendum. That's leaving the European Union. And we want to do it in a way that ensures we respect the votes of those who voted to leave in that referendum. That means ending free movement. It means getting a fairer deal for farmers and fishermen. It means opening up new opportunities to trade with the rest of the world. And it means keeping good ties with our neighbours in Europe.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about the customs union. The Prime Minister seems to be in denial about that, just as much as she's in denial about the decision made by the House last night. I understand the Business Secretary told business leaders on a conference call last night, we can't have no deal for all the reasons you've set out. Can the Prime Minister now reassure the House, businesses and the country and confirm that is indeed the government's position, that we can't have no deal?
I think that the point that the Business Secretary is making, and that he has made previously, is that if you don't want to have no deal, you have to ensure that you have a deal. Now, I will say this to the right honourable gentleman. There are actually two ways of avoiding no deal. The first is to agree a deal, and the second would be to revoke Article 50. Now, that would mean staying in the European Union, failing to respect the result of the referendum, and that is something that this government will not do.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister hasn't answered on a customs union, hasn't answered on no deal, and continues to spend £4.2 billion of public money on a no deal scenario. Can't she understand? Yesterday the House rejected her deal. She needs to come up with something different than that. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not just on Brexit that this government is failing. 4 million working people are living in poverty. 500,000 more children in poverty compared to 2010. The Rowntree Foundation confirms in-work poverty was rising faster than the overall employment rate. With poverty rising, can the Prime Minister tell us when we can expect it to fall for the time she remains in office?
Can I tell the right honourable gentleman what is happening? We now see 1 million fewer people in absolute poverty. That is a record low. We see 300,000 fewer children in absolute poverty. That is a record low. We see a record low in the number of children living in workerless households, and income inequality lower than at any point under the last Labour government. That's Conservatives delivering for the people of this country. What would we see from the Labour Party? £1,000 billion more in borrowing and taxes, the equivalent of £35,000 for every household in this country. That's Labour failing to deliver for working people, because working people always pay the price of the Labour Party.
Jeremy Corbyn.
In denial on a customs union, in denial on no deal, in denial on the amount of money being spent preparing for no deal, in denial on last night's result. And even the UN rapporteur on poverty says the government is... Well, Mr. Speaker, it's very telling indeed, that as soon as I mention the report of the UN rapporteur who said the government was in a state of denial about poverty in Britain, Tory MPs start jeering. Tell that to people queuing up at food banks. The government too, Mr. Speaker, has failed on children's education. Can the Prime Minister tell us what is her greatest failure? Is it that education funding has been cut by £7 billion, per pupil funding fallen by 8%, sixth form funding cut by a fifth, or that the adult skills budget has been slashed by 45%? Which is it, Prime Minister?
Hundreds of free schools, a reformed curriculum, 1.9 million more children in good or outstanding schools, narrowing the attainment gap for disadvantaged children. This is a government that is delivering the education that our children need for their future. But I say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about being in denial. The only person in denial in this chamber is him, because he has consistently failed to set out what his policy on Brexit is. I said to him last week that he might do with a lip reader. I think when it comes to his Brexit policy, the rest of us need a mind reader.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is very well aware that we want there to be a customs union with the EU. She seems to be in denial about that. But one of the problems she has on her denial is the flagrant disregard for facts and statistics. And the Statistics Authority has written to the Department of Education 4 times to express their concern about the use of dodgy figures by her ministers. When police officers told the then Home Secretary not to make more cuts to police, that Home Secretary accused them of crying wolf. With 21,000 fewer police officers and rising crime across the country, does the Prime Minister accept that the then Home Secretary got it wrong?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, of course, as we look at what is happening, particularly at what is happening on knife crime and serious violence, we recognise the need to take action. That's why we've introduced the Offensive Weapons Bill, and it's why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has introduced the Serious Violence Strategy. We are also making nearly £1 billion more available to police forces over the next year. But I also say to the right honourable gentleman, yet again in all of these questions about public services, he only ever talks about the money that's going in. What matters with the police is the powers that we give them as well. And what was it when we came to the issue of knife crime? When we came to the issue of taking more action at criminals who were involved in knife crime, when we said that if somebody was caught on the streets for a second time for a knife crime, they should be sent to prison, what did the right honourable gentleman do? He voted against. He doesn't support our police. He doesn't support our security.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Increased the number of police on our streets. It was a Labour government that brought in safer neighbourhoods. It was a Labour government that properly funded the police force. It's the Tories that have cut it. Ask anyone on any street around this country, do they feel safer now than they did 8 years ago? I think we all know what the answer would be. It was that Home Secretary that not only attacked the police with that, but also created the hostile environment and the Windrush scandal. She promised to tackle burning injustices. She's made them worse, as Windrush showed. More homelessness, more children in poverty, more older people without care, longer waits at A&E, fewer nurses, rising crime, less safe streets, cuts to children's education. This government has failed our country. It cannot govern, cannot command the support of most people facing the most important issue at the moment, which is Brexit. They failed again and lost the vote last night. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that with every other previous Prime Minister faced with the scale of defeat last night, they would have resigned and the country would be able to choose the government that they want?
The right honourable gentleman in that peroration talked about the importance of the issue of Brexit that is facing this country. Later today we're going to have the no confidence debate. He has been calling for weeks for a general election in this country, and yet on Sunday, when he was asked in a general election would he campaign to leave the European Union, he refused to answer. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 5 times he refused to answer. So on what he himself describes as the key issue facing this country, he has no answer. The leader of the opposition has let anti-Semitism run riot in his party. He would abandon our allies, weaken our security and wreck our economy, and we will never let that happen.